we're going to have a panel discussion coming next. And so to take us through that, I'd like to welcome our Director of Strategy, Tanvi Lall. She'll be leading a conversation on building AI for India in India. So Tanvi brings a lot of experience from her work across investment, healthcare, technology, and strategy. So Tanvi, please join us and take us forward.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our panel. We've titled this very specifically. We've heard from leaders today who've talked about AI globally, AI in India. And then we said, how about bringing some of those leaders to the stage who are actually building AI for India and in India. So that's the panel today. I'd like to welcome the panelists first. We have Divya. Divya, if you could join us. Divya is the CEO and co-founder of Pinky Promise. This is an AI-powered health tech app that basically helps women across India gain information to good sexual health and reproductive health. Divya's journey has been extremely unique. She's a trained biologist from Yale. She's a Wharton MBA grad. She worked with the Delhi government during the Nirbhaya case. She's worked at the World Bank, and then she basically pivoted into entrepreneurship to do healthcare for critical gaps that exist in India. Again, a very unique space. So welcome, Divya. We have Shreya with us. Shreya, if you could join us. A very short description for Shreya is she is the next generation of AI engineers and innovators. She is a senior engineering student at PES University. Shreya is a very unique candidate. She's one of the more enterprising students who has gone outside into industry and found opportunities to contribute. She spent 6 months with us at People+ai. Today works in big tech. Today she'll be discussing opportunities and places where students really want to explore and get into industry, and also the challenges that they're facing as they start to enter this world. And lastly, we have Astha with us. Astha. Astha Kapoor is the co-founder of Aapti Institute. Aapti is a civil society body that studies the social impact of AI technology that's getting built and deployed in India. Astha works at the intersection of AI policy and governance. She represents India at global AI forums. Her research initiatives include, really delving into the depths of trust, data pipelines and data governance, and really how do you do responsible AI? And that's really the discussion that we want to get into. I think all of you have mics, hopefully. Okay, great. So we're all set up. So, we've heard these themes of inclusivity, responsible AI, and, they've come up again and again. But our belief at People+ai Next Step is that truly for it to be impactful, you really have to take everyone along on the journey. And really that's what I'm hoping we get into today. And, maybe Divya, let's start with you. At Pinky Promise, you're building a solution that caters to women and is used by women from all across India. You're delivering some very critical and very sensitive health information to them that they're not used to. So could you share a little bit more firstly about how do you do that delivery of that information, and how do you make it inclusive? How do you make it such that customers, and how do you explain what Pinky Promise is doing?
Thank you for that question, Tanvi. Just so that everyone's on the same page in terms of just setting some context, what Pinky Promise does is a woman can come and click a button, instantly connect with a gynecologist. Our software, which we have custom trained on a bunch of AI models, is actually able to start figuring out what her symptoms and medical history needs to be asked of her. In a minute or two, she's able to chat and complete that conversation, describe everything that's going on with her, and get a prescription or a diagnosis or a care plan instantly. So in minutes, she actually goes from having a problem, especially in sexual and reproductive health care that she's ashamed or scared to talk to anybody about, to knowing exactly what medicines to take. And we, in fact, never thought of this as an AI-first solution. we just went into the problem. And we started off realizing that in India, there are 365 million women of reproductive age, and there are only 70,000 registered gynecologists of varying degrees of quality. Most of these gynecologists practice in the big cities, and they are largely obstetrics focused. So if a woman is having a missed period, if she's having a yeast infection, if she's having chronic conditions like she's perimenopausal or something like that, who's she going to talk to immediately? Like, you get groceries in 10 minutes, but you can't talk to a doctor immediately. That seemed really messed up. And so AI came up as a thing that would actually bridge that severe supply-demand mismatch that we were looking at. And so we started building first. We only build decision trees. We do not build any AI. And we started off with really simple issues that could easily be triaged, where there were clear medical protocols in place, and that's really where the amount of evidence that exists in medicine really helped us, because we used those protocols and we used that evidence to actually start spinning out something that served as a prototype. We had like nothing. We were just working out of my bedroom at that point of time. And used sort of Facebook and WhatsApp groups to start asking women these questions and getting answers from them. Through that process, we built our first version of the app, which was just on Android, and launched it like as a soft launch on the Play Store, and found about 1,000+ women using it. We then spoke to each and every one of them. And we realized, we thought, our assumption was maybe well-educated women who are used to these kind of technologies are going to be the first people who are actually going to start using this, and then, it'll spread to the rest of India. We were mistaken. Out of the 1,000+ women, more than 80% actually were from Tier 2, Tier 3 and smaller parts of India. And they were using our app. So we spoke to each of them, and that's how we've been building. So we then built out proper, we custom trained our own models, built AI that we call AI today, and ensured that, for about 365 different conditions, Pinky Promise was able to immediately solve the problem for women. But inclusivity has been a challenge always, because it's also available at 99 rupees. It's also instant. So you have women like us, who are sitting here today using Pinky Promise because it's convenient. And then you have women in really small towns and other areas of India who are using it because it's very cheap. And otherwise they have no one else to go to. So more than 70% of our customer base still comes from Tier 2, Tier 3 India. And so for us to be able to ensure that Pinky Promise is available in multiplicity of Indian languages, today also we have a support team that actually talks to every single person who's actually consulted at Pinky Promise and sort of gotten a consultation to make sure that they understand their prescription. And using all that feedback, we actually keep on feeding that into our platform. We are a team of 6 women, and all 6 of us actually work on product. We don't have a separate product team. Everyone in customer service, everyone who's an intern, everyone who's a CTO included, all of us work on product, because this is a process that keeps us going and ensures that we are actually inclusive and we are solving both for India as well as Bharat. So that's sort of how we've done it.
Well, that's amazing, but I think a large part of this is also you taking that extra effort of doing that customer support, right? There is a human in the loop who is talking to each of your customers and trying to make the product better. And I think it's very unique. You said all 6 of your team members work on the product. Okay, great. Astha, at this point, my question is for you. You look at how you can bring marginalized voices and, make them more included in the AI decision making and making products better. How do you do that? Are there any frameworks that you could share with us?
So I'm Astha, like you said, I'm the co-founder of Aapti Institute, and what we do is that we look at the social impact of technology, trying to understand, we're building all of these things, but what does it mean for the people on the ground? And also, how can we learn from experiences and then see if we can develop both the better products and better policies? So, that's the framework within which we work. When it comes to AI, I think that we've been looking at it from sort of bits and bobs of it. So, one of the areas that we've been very interested in is that all of this, the beautiful things that we've seen demonstrated today actually do have humans at the back of it. So questions of labor, right? That's one of the big things that we think about, which is that there's a lot of like human labor behind the magic of technology. And how do we say, okay, fine, how do we include it, not just extract that labor, but then also see if we can include their voices in it. The second place that we think a lot about is data, which is that a lot of the data that is being used to develop these models is about us, is related to us. Should we have a better say in how some of this is happening? So an area that we think a lot about is about making data much more, not just representative, but also how do we create agency over this data that is being collected and used, but we don't have necessarily a say in where it goes and where it doesn't go. So building bottom-up mechanisms for where people can exercise agency over the direction that their data is taking. So to give you an example, we know that a lot of use cases at the moment around AI is about, one of the examples that was demonstrated was on nutrition and poshan. One of the things that we've heard in our fieldwork is from the mothers themselves, which is that they feel that a lot of this data is just being extracted from them, and this is actually just, potentially compliance for the government and not necessarily value to them. So they just feel like, and as a mother, I can tell you, like, nobody is more concerned about the nutrition of my child than I am, but how do you make sure that we give value back so that it's not just a dashboard for the Anganwadi worker who's taking it or for the BDO who's going to report on nutrition, but can we have an interface for the mothers themselves, which is how do we give this value of the data back? How do we make it much more tangible? And what we're also seeing is that on the ground, people are starting to zone into the fact that they're not getting anything in return. All of this is happening at a level that is not fully graspable. So we've also been in situations where people say, oh, they come and ask us for data and we just give them garbage, right? And people are sort of livening up to that. So how do you create that specific value? And I know that a lot of conversations also occur on trust, and we've just concluded a 2-year piece of work on ideas of digital trust. How do people trust technologies? And I know so much of the focus, and ma'am, on your presentation as well, was on safety, security, and privacy, which are obviously critical pillars of trust. But trust is also a very fundamental human experience, which we repose in the people around us, in our own networks. And we also need to think about how we take this human part of trust, bharosa, right, and put that and think about that in the context of technology. Because I think that what we do very well, because we're trying to sell and push, applications, we're trying to say, okay, fine, this is for public good, this is all of that. We do a really good job of building trust, but we don't do a good job of maintaining it and repairing it. And in that process, what ends up happening is that we lose people along the way. So I think that we have to think of this much. So if I was to drill it down, I think it's just about demonstrating value, creating opportunities for agency and negotiation, and building trust in a much more sort of humane way and not just in a technical security kind of way.
So there definitely seems to be a need for storytelling also, right? Like
And co-design.
really getting down to the user's level and understanding their perspective, right? Shreya, I want to pull you in at this point, and I'm trying to understand, enlighten me. When you look at AI education for undergraduate, and let's say for undergraduate engineering students today, are students today excited about building AI for underrepresented communities? Do you have, do you even understand or have access to the opportunities that India brings? What's your take on it?
I think with education, it's kind of tricky because when we come from an engineering perspective, we're thinking about all the technology that comes with engineering. And education is hard to keep up with all the technology that's coming up with AI. So how do you design the curriculum to keep up? The fundamentals are involved, like statistics or the ML is core subjects now. But how do you create the education that has not 4 hours of lectures, right? Because students aren't keen about that. But when you said the word building, that's what we're keen on. As engineers, that's what we want to see, is something that we built that someone is using and is impactful to someone. So the gap that I think, from my experience with now a few months in the space, is that we know how to use technology, but we don't know what to use it for. And that's where the gap in education, at least in universities, can be fulfilled. And this could maybe be more design thinking, more what is the impact of AI that India can see. And that will help us pick up use cases that actually make sense. Take, for example, I picked up a use case of ice hockey statistics when I was in college. And what impact does that have, right? what if I had someone like them and they could tell me that, okay, this is something that we're missing, build an ML model for this. That would really help students build something that's meaningful to them and be educated while learning the technology that's used for our use cases.
Interesting. I have many questions about why ice hockey, but just moving on. See, everything the three of you have kind of mentioned up till now requires a lot of collaboration. It requires collaboration between different personas who are sitting at the core team table to make the product, to deploy the product, to maintain the product. It requires collaboration between academia and industry, and maybe even government, and policy thinkers and society bodies like Astha's. So maybe coming back to you, Astha, my question is, you've recently attended the AI Action Summit in Paris, and I'm just trying to understand from, like, firstly, what role could India play at the global stage, and what are the sort of governance models or frameworks that maybe we have not applied in an AI context, but now we could apply in the building and deploying AI for India context that you think could work?
Yeah. So I think, so India was a co-chair of the Paris AI Action Summit, and I don't think that we sort of extended ourselves very much into that role. But the next summit is in India, so that gives us an opportunity to really frame some of these questions. I think that the role India can play, and some of this was highlighted in the conversations in Paris also, is that, I mean, this has been said many times, is that a lot of what we are seeing is actually coming from, the global north in terms of models, in terms of structures, and a lot of the thinking and a lot of the power is actually concentrated in the hands of a few companies. This is something that India has been talking about in some ways. We have always had a fairly progressive view on competition. We do talk about the value of open source, but I think that for us as a country, I think that we have an opportunity to take a leadership role in the global south and think about what it really means to build for chaotic societies like ours, to know that, and we were just talking earlier, is that the problem of India's context, we cannot build for things that are, I think this was an example Sohail gave just before, was that, in India, if you have a headache, there are so many different ways to talk about it, and if you say that out loud onto a model, they're not going to know how to translate that back for you, right? So I think that to think of much more context-specific ecosystems for AI, what that means, and that also means moving away in some ways from this like bigness and largeness that we have come to expect from AI, and to think of what those smaller models are. How do you make sure that you can build for context, and that also then goes back to my earlier point of then extending into things like value for communities, building trust at a much more ecosystem where I can see, I know my ration guy, I know my block guy, right? Like I know these people, they're not far away, and so I can hold them accountable versus things that are, so I think that that's the role India can play, and one that we should be looking to construct pretty soon, given that we don't have a lot of time. The French had extended into public interest AI, which worked well. They raised money around it, etc. But I think for us, thinking much more about what is contextual AI, what are the specific use cases, and how these can be extended to contexts that are similar to ours would be an area that I think we should push into.
Got it. Divya, maybe coming to you at this stage, in specifically your context, right, where you are sharing very sensitive information with users, and they're sharing extremely sensitive data with you guys. What are the challenges that you've come across, and how do you deal with it practically?
So I think there are sort of two challenges, right? Like number one is, how do you handle the data that you're being trusted with? And I think the second challenge is, how do you then train models using data? So the model training challenge and the at present challenge. So I think the first thing we realized is we're really building in the wild, wild west. There are very limited regulatory restrictions placed on organizations when it comes to data handling. And that's the truth. So at Pinky Promise, we did a pre-mortem exercise, and we were like, what is the one thing that if it happened tomorrow would be the end of Pinky Promise? And that is actually associated with data breaches, because women coming to Pinky Promise trust us with information that they have not told even their partner or their family members. So they come to Pinky Promise and they trust us with such sensitive and important information about their healthcare. So at the beginning itself, we've basically done everything and more in terms of just our data handling, data architecture, access rules, all of those things to ensure that at bare minimum, a lot of the HIPAA compliant regulations are being catered to. There's encryption at rest, for example. There's a lot of like identifying information that only doctors will have, that nobody else on the team will ever have. It's on a minimum as need to know basis information sharing that happens. And there's a lot of training that we constantly do. For the users who are actually using Pinky Promise, we try to ensure that we're as transparent as possible in terms of what are we actually, like, why are we collecting the data that we want to collect? And what are we doing with it? So whatever is needed for us to be able to actually diagnose somebody is what we collect from them. And we have a lot of disclaimers to enable women to understand why is that data required. Now, because a doctor and a medical platform is asking that for them, they are willing to commit. But they should still know, like, why am I sharing this information about my last period? Why am I sharing this information about my birth control history? That's like, that is a bare minimum that we do in terms of communicating to users. And it's still a barrier that we have to keep trying to traverse in terms of how do we make it as easy as possible for them to understand what happens to their data, why is that data being asked of them. Now, in terms of model training, I think we've been a little bit lucky because I think number one, we started off saying that there's a lot of open source information that's available. There's a lot of evidence, a lot of randomized control trials, and a lot of information that is now fed into some of the top gynecological protocols that the world is using, a lot of medical textbooks that are best in class that we can actually start training our models on. So we started with that, and now with about like more than 200,000 women actually using Pinky Promise, when we start using actual patient data to train, something that we're very careful about is it has to be de-identified, it has to be anonymized, it has to be decontextualized, and then only we can start actually training our models on this. So these are the bare minimum sort of safeguards that we use, because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that, you know, we exist for a mission. And even in terms of how we handle the data and how we use that to build our models, like, we're still sort of doing what we can to ensure that data privacy is, you know, taken care of and our customers are protected.
Got it. You know, with AI, one sort of new wave of discussion that I want to talk about is the fact that how these new roles are getting created. It's no longer about just the AI engineer or technologist. You have product, you have policy, you have so many other people and personas that are now arriving at the table. And I actually want to start with you, Shreya. In your experience, right, and especially in the last 2 years, think about and tell us, like, what kind of internships, mentorships, initiatives, right, have really enabled you to think about participating in AI initiatives that build for India? And what would you like to see more of? Like, how do you think academia can benefit, and what would help?
I think internships are great, right? Because coming out of college, all you have is that theoretical knowledge. And like I said, unless you connect it to a use case, there is really no point of it. And mentorship is especially useful because it's not hard to find. I think students only grow with mentorship, whether it's the faculty or the peers in your college. But it could be taken a step above if you get mentorship from the industry. And mentorship from people who are building AI solutions, people with domain knowledge. Like, you could be the AI expert, but if you don't have the domain knowledge, how are you going to build a solution or know what the problem is? So that's where I think mentorship comes in. Another place where I see mentorship might really benefit is with entrepreneurship. AI is now, like, every place in Bangalore will have an AI startup. But if a student wants to be an AI entrepreneur, how do you mentor the student? Because they might not have the business knowledge and just the technical knowledge. And that's another key region where mentorship comes in. And all of this could be mentorship through internships. And in my experience, if you work with internships, the kind of use cases you're exposed to open up ideas not just about the technology that you're using, but about how to apply that technology.
Got it. Astha, specifically for you, When it comes to like policy, right, and entrepreneurs, and we know this in Bangalore and Hyderabad, as people are getting started on their startup journey, from a policy angle, from a governance angle, how do people start inculcating the values of responsible AI early? Like, what would your advice be to them?
Oh, tricky question. And I think maybe better for the startups here to reflect on versus me. But I think that from a regulatory environment, I think that, and we've learned this over time, but, safety, security, like you talked about, or rather much more privacy, I think, is a people concern that one needs to think about. I also think about, some of the things that we've learned through India's DPI journey, which is like openness and its necessity for competition. I think that's the other part of it. And then I think that we need better standards, and some of the AI guidelines have tried to do this, is take an ecosystem approach, think about, there are principles in the new METI AI guidelines on transparency, representation, and a few other things. I think we need to go a step further and see what that actually looks like in implementation, because I think that the policy landscape and people who worked on it will say that those are some of and the fairness, accountability, all of the frameworks all exist in the policy ecosystem. I think that where we need to spend more time in is thinking about the implementation. And as a country that is just thinking about its data protection bill, or rather rules have just come, we're thinking about implementation. I think moving also early into some of those questions and doing it in a much more consultative way, so that you bring the startup ecosystem, the builders of tech with policymakers and civil society all in, the framework that the XTEP Foundation uses, the Samaj Sarkar Bazaar framework, is really useful in thinking about all of this, because I think that we need to create before the regulation comes, I think that there's always a journey that needs to be made, which can then both incept early some of the values that we've been talking about here, but then also make sure that the policy and regulation that comes out is actually embedded in the ability to implement versus some lofty goals. So I have a much more procedural view on that versus actually a qualitative one.
No, but what I'm hearing is that start early, because you will iterate along the process. Get great people like Shreya early on, because they will help you on that journey, and really talk to your customers and users like Shreya, like Divya has. Divya, question for you now. I really want to know what inspired you to start Pinky Promise, and really what has been your biggest challenge up to now, because you really are dealing in a very untapped space that not many venture into.
So I think what prompted me to start Pinky Promise was my own, like a personal incident that I had. I was pregnant with my first child, and at night I had some symptoms. And I was like, why can't I just ping somewhere instead of looking at long form articles on Google, or connecting to like a not so good quality person who may be available in a sort of a telemedicine platform or something. Can I just get a quality answer immediately from a practitioner, from a gynecologist, in terms of what's going on with me? And then it took me about 14 days back and forth with my data being all over the place for me to actually get a diagnosis. So that, I was like, if a person in a city like Mumbai, with the kind of educational levels that we have, if this person is experiencing this, I can't imagine what it's like for the rest of India. So that's sort of a simple personal incident that actually prompted me to start Pinky Promise. But I think that over the course of sort of building, I realized that almost every woman I have spoken to has had some sort of a struggle getting a diagnosis in time, or taking time to actually go to a gynecologist. There was a lady we spoke to from Patan in Gujarat, one of the first users of the Pinky Promise app. So I said, "Aap idhar kyun aa rahe ho?" And she said that actually Tuesday lady doctor हमारे government hospital में आती है और 300 लोगों की line लगती है और वहाँ पे मैं कैसे बता सकती हूँ ऐसे कैसे problems है मेरे. So I was like, okay, this is a huge thing that we need to start solving for immediately. So that's really what prompted us to start building this. In terms of challenges, I think that there have been two really big challenges that we've had to overcome, and LLMs actually have helped us with challenge number 2. Challenge number 1 has actually just been winning acceptability that this is a core technology solution. I feel like women building technology are not taken very seriously. And so I think the bar is super high because there have been so many people who we've talked to and people have been like, but this is not really AI, na? Like, how can 2 like women in their 30s be building AI? So I think that has been one huge challenge that we've had to like cross constantly, like overshooting the bar. I'm sure a lot of people relate to this. Constantly overshooting the bar to demonstrate credibility. But I think the second, and interestingly, because women are taking to the platform and using it, like we've been able to say that, this is actually working, guys. But the second interesting thing was, to me, more accessible. So when we started out, all these medical protocols, medical terminologies, they're all not understandable to the lay population. Even something like LMP, right, last menstrual period, people are like 28 days. So it's very difficult. So I think the second challenge is actually to build product that is simple and easily navigable in multiple Indian languages. So for the multiple Indian languages part, I think LLMs have been really useful. For the first part, it's actually calling and talking to everybody who's used our app to be like, did you understand this question? Did you understand that question? And constantly sort of simplifying it. And it's been a very exciting challenge. The first one, not so much, but the second one, super exciting. So yeah.
Okay, we're going to wrap this up, but very quickly, 20 seconds each. You have a room full of leaders, students, very interesting people. What is that one piece of advice you would like to give to this room? People who likely getting started on their AI journey. We'll start with you, Divya.
So I think, like a lot of people in the room already said, there is so much context-specific innovation that still really remains to be done. Like for us, what excites us is medical models consider women to be small men, whereas women are not small men. It's very different, right? So we're building AI for women. Super exciting. Like that, there's just so much more that still remains to be solved for, and we saw some incredible demos, incredible speakers all talking about it. So I feel like if you have a great idea in terms of what you may want to do using AI, like the time to do it is now. Yeah.
Well said. Shreya.
I think if I was talking to my peers or someone in my college or engineers, I would say seize every opportunity. Right? You're going to have internships, hackathons, meetups, all of those. Seize them and don't underestimate yourself, because unlike what Divya's had to deal with, where they say you're 30-year-olds building AI, I think people know that now students can build AI, and that barrier isn't there for us. The technology is so new that someone with 15 years of experience probably isn't that ahead of you. You can pick it up right now. And I think lastly, what really sets AI apart is that we have these like computer science models like TCP/IP, which have been built over years, and it takes years to change them. But tweaking a network is easy, right? You can tweak something to really fit Indian context and fix it somewhere, and it's not as hard to adopt. And I think that's where students in AI really can change what we're doing.
I have a much smaller one. I think it's just to pick off from Divya's thread is like, think of the users, co-design, get your hands dirty. This is not a computer level problem to solve tweaking networks, but one about people, and let's put people into the AI, which is an easy one for this group to do. So yeah.
Thank you, ladies. Thank you, and happy Women's Day.